Good to have you elsewhere. The immediate past, the Nigerian government created a buzz around what it called the Ease of Doing Business program, which aimed at creating a conducive climate to attract as much foreign investment into the economy as possible. Under the current dispensation, it could be difficult to say that similar efforts have been committed in that direction. The President Bola Tinubu apparently preferring a globe-trotting approach to achieve success. Parameters may not be same, but analysts are indeed curious as to how success in the economic revival of Nigeria can be measured at the moment. Amit Jain is Director NTU SBF Center for African Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He joins us now to chew on what should constitute the priority agenda for economic revival of Nigeria. It's good to have you with us on Newsday.
Thank you so much.
All right, so let's get down to it. It's been said oftentimes that Nigeria has potentials for growth, but what, in your view, is hindering the country from maximizing its full potential, do you think?
You know, if you look at where Nigeria is at this point, it's in the midst of a perfect storm. It's battling high inflation, insecurity, the foreign exchange reserve situation, as you very well know, is precarious. Slow growth, rising poverty and insecurity. The international environment is not particularly conducive either. With US Fed Reserves having interest rate hikes, it's difficult to raise capital, go to the international market. So if you are a policymaker, you would feel almost overwhelmed. So there are multiple reasons why Nigeria is in a place, finds itself in a place. But clearly, it's down to what we have done in our recommendation is that we have broken this into 3 phases. We've done the SWOT analysis of the economy. 2 years, what Nigeria needs to do, 5 years, and then 10 years and onwards. So if I can just cast your attention to the priorities for the next 2 years, more than anything else, stop the bad situation from getting worse. And how do you do that? You focus on fiscal and monetary, which is what the administration of President Bola Tinubu has set out to do, which is a welcome thing. Clearly, cutting fuel subsidy, unification of the exchange rate, and targeting inflation was the right thing to do. But there's more importantly, fix the leakage in the oil production and ramp that back, because that will create revenues, which will give you the fiscal space to create more reforms. So those are some of the most important things that needs to be done in the immediate future.
Very good. I was taking a look at the Nigeria Roadmap report, which you authored at some points. Can you summarize the policy priorities for the next decade? I know you brought out a little excerpt from that, but what are your thoughts in that? Hopefully in a few minutes you can do that.
Sure. So moving on from the 2-year priority, as I mentioned, which is to bring stabilization, focusing on fiscal and monetary. The next phase would be to revive growth. It will happen because the moment you get your fiscal and monetary right, you will create the space to introduce more reforms. That will revive growth. And what that means is over the next 5 years, you create a suitable investment climate, improve the business confidence, and bring GDP growth rate back to something like 4% and so on, revive employment. After that, once growth is revived, it would be another set of reforms that would need to be taken, that would need to be the long term, sustain that growth. Oftentimes, emerging economies, once they get through the first critical few phases of reforms, the urgent ones, the political environment, the urgency to introduce further reforms disappears. And there's a tendency to go back and slacken. And this has happened with many developing countries. This is something that we would like in our report. We've cautioned against that. And that would mean focusing on human capital, governance. And the third thing, you need a benign international environment, which, of course, Nigeria can't do much about, but the other two, it certainly can.
All right, very good. There's been much talk about diversification, from high dependency on oil. Looking at efforts so far in Nigeria, are we on the path of real competitiveness here, or is still a myth?
Early days. These are early days. I think it would be unrealistic for anyone to expect the government of the day to create that environment straight up in such a short period of time. They've certainly taken the right steps. Those were urgent, those were needed, and the room for any more delays was simply not there. So I think the government of the day should be commended for having undertaken those bold and often difficult reforms. Now you could criticize them for not doing it in a phased manner or doing it abruptly. Nonetheless, that has been done, and market has seen that, and the signals are positive. I would urge Nigerians to have a little bit more patience how this all plays out, and not to lose sight of the ball.
Not to lose sight of the ball. Now, let's talk about issues of fiscal stability, debt servicing, of course, high inflation and balance of payment problems. It will seem insurmountable based on current narratives, but you're urging patience as it well. So what are the prospects of a breakthrough here? What do we need to do to go beyond the short-term measures, as it were?
One of the things that hobbles your drive to create a much more sustained growth is how much of investments are made in improving education, improving the state of the hard infrastructure, and moving away from dependence on primary commodities towards a much more diversified economy. If you look at where Nigeria is today, even though oil and gas is only 9%, is contributing 9% to the GDP, the dependence on fossil fuel for foreign exchange is over 80%. The services sector contributes more than 50% to the country's GDP. If your investments can move away from this dependence on fossil fuels towards a much more of a diversified economy, improving the productivity of the agriculture sector, creating a benign environment for foreign investments to create manufacturing, domestic investors also to be able to raise capital at a competitive rate, I think Nigeria would very quickly once again move to a virtuous cycle.
Very good. Now, there's been much discussion about the financial services sector as making profits at the expenses of others as well. What are your thoughts that, look, the banks are, always having these quarterly profit margins, as it were, bringing out their, reports. And the same cannot be said for the manufacturing sector and other, sectors as well. What's your thought on that? What are the immediate impacts of that?
Here's the thing. I think there is a lot of clog in the system. What Nigeria needs to ensure is removing the barriers that are in place between in the financial system, in the financial sector, for it to be able to lend, borrow much more effectively at much lower cost. And deliver the outcome to, moving the capital from where it is in excess to where it is really required. What the banks today are doing is what they would be expected to do if they are to remain sustainable. At the moment, there aren't very many choices for them. So if you can criticize them for using, their services to essentially play around in the foreign exchange market, it would be unfair. There isn't that much available elsewhere for them to do. But creating a much wider capital markets, creating a much more depth in your capital market, making sure interest rates come down over a period of time. They're very, very high right now. I think that would then, you will begin to see the financial sector playing a much more the role of a catalyst for greater growth.
And still talking about catalyst for greater growth, there's what we call the fintech. We're seeing a resurgence of revival of innovation of more younger entrepreneurs in that area, providing jobs for Nigerians, as it were. So how can we sustain that beyond that sector and into others as well? It's not just the finance industry, but we're also looking at the issue of technology as well. There's some investment from companies like Microsoft. They're showing interest in trying to develop that. So how can we sustain that in that regard?
Look, I mean, the ICT sector is something that Nigeria should definitely be proud of. If you look at the number of unicorns that have come out of Africa, if my last calculation was correct, 4 out of 6 have been out of Nigeria.
But would you say population to a large extent is also a factor
has
that
contributed?
improves?
Yes, has contributed. The startup ecosystem here addresses that critical question, which is it tries to address a problem. And usage of technology, adoption of technology in emerging markets tends to be faster simply because the technology helps services jump over barriers. They're not held by the legacy systems that are in place in some of the more developed markets, and the need is so much greater. E-commerce is a classic example of why that has succeeded. But there is only a limit to which that can continue. As you know, the entire startup ecosystem in Nigeria is also dependent on VC funding, which comes essentially from the West. And this year has been probably the worst year for VC funding all around the world, certainly in emerging markets. And they will struggle with that in the future.
Okay, so talking about reforms based on this report, would you suggest the Nigerian government introduce quickly the country? Is it actually on the path of growth, as it were? You mentioned the fact of, it's still a short-term thing.
Give it more time.
We should give it more time, but sustainability here, your thoughts on that?
It's a roadmap. It's a long, hard slog. We are still in the early phase. We are still in the very early phase of reforms. Certainly, the initial bits of news coming out, decisions taken by the central bank, by the Minister of Finance, by the administration, is absolutely correct. They're on the right track. The test would be to stay on course. Stay on course.
Hopefully, more Nigerians will share your optimism on that. Amit Jain, Director, NTU SBF Center for African Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Would like to thank you for your thoughts on those issues. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right.